Are you ready for good talk?
What will it take to build a stronger Canadian economy? New major projects, ideas to unlock more sources of investment, Canadian companies to deliver results. Canada's life and health insurers are ready partners to build a stronger Canada. We've got resources, know-how, and serve millions of Canadians every day. Find out how we can help even more.
And hello there, Peter Mansbridge here, along with Chantal Hebert and Bruce Anderson. It's your Friday morning good talk, and as always, we've got lots to talk about this day. Starting with something that I don't know. I guess either I've always wanted to see, or I always thought was going to happen. A sort of Donald Trump, Doug Ford, fight, and that's what we've got going on this morning. I guess it's really Donald Trump versus Canada against Mark Carney, but really it's being instigated by Doug Ford, the Ontario government running an ad campaign in the United States. It's been going on for some time now, and Donald Trump has seen it. He's seen it for some time. But it's basically using Ronald Reagan's words against tariffs in an ad that Ontario is running in different parts of the U.S. Well, last night, Donald Trump got really upset about this ad, even though he's seen it, as I said, for a number of days. He got upset and he killed the trade talks with Ottawa. He said, I'm terminating the trade talks now because of this ad. So I guess the question becomes fairly quickly, is this real? Is it just bluster? We've seen bluster before by Donald Trump. How seriously should we take it? Chantal, you start us.
Well, like everyone who covers politics for a long time, I don't believe in coincidences. And in this case, the coincidence is not that the ad is running and suddenly President Trump, after a few days of reflection, deep reflection, has decided that it's so totally unacceptable that he's terminating negotiations with the Canadian government on trade. This happens, this social media post comes out hours after Canada decides to fight back on auto by imposing tariffs of sorts on Stellantis and GM for having diminished the place of Canadian production in their vehicles. And so Stellantis, we heard about last week, moving the production of a vehicle from Ontario to the US. And in the case of GM, stopping the production of a vehicle in Canada and leaving the future of that assembly line wide open. So this takes place late yesterday afternoon. And a few hours later, suddenly the Ontario ad is so infuriating that there can't be discussions about trade issues with Canada. At the same time, and despite leaks that hinted that there might be some kind of progress on some of the trade files between Canada and the US next week at on the margins of the APEC summit in Asia, the Prime Minister, in a speech Wednesday night, and his lead minister on the file, Dominique Leblanc, basically spent the week sending the message that no, there's still quite a long road ahead before we see progress on any of those files. My understanding is that at this point, Canada may be turning down concessions that Donald Trump expected Canada to just accept, just to get some progress. And let's agree about what we're talking about here, because I spent a lot of time trying to do that. We are not talking about negotiations that would lead, if they took place, to progress for Canada in the larger sense of the word. We are talking about negotiations to limit damage on Canada through tariffs. So a win is actually just a bit of relief is where we're at. And it may well be that President Trump has decided that Canada is not compliant enough in those talks, so there's no point in pursuing them.
Where are you on this, Bruce?
A few things. First of all, it's been clear to me for some time, I guess, that the only way that President Trump is likely to move away from his fascination with tariffs is if Republican sentiment in the United States builds up in the direction of opposing the tariffs. And so I think the idea of using Ronald Reagan's argument and playing it out before Republican voters, especially in swing states, is a good idea. It's a fair thing to do. And it was surprising to me that the Ronald Reagan Foundation came out with the statement that they did, which said basically that the ad was misrepresenting somehow Ronald Reagan's views. It wasn't misrepresenting those views. Every piece of journalistic coverage I've seen of this story, by the way, including the New York Times this morning, said that exactly, that claiming this ad was fake, that it was a misrepresentation of Reagan is not right. And a lot of those commentaries have included links to the original full transcript or tape of what Reagan said. And one of the ironies of how these things play out in the digital landscape is that a lot more people will now see that ad and will probably consume the kind of the more extensive version of what Reagan said, and will understand that Ronald Reagan was dead set against the idea of America using tariffs. What will it really mean? It's not the first time that Ronald Reagan has declared by Twitter or Truth Social post that he was mad and that he wanted to end the negotiations with Canada. He's done it with other countries. I think it's impossible to know how material it is at this point. It's probably part of, I'd say the cut and thrust, but the cut and thrust sounds like something that's a little bit more stylish than what is happening in terms of how the U.S. is approaching these conversations. Maybe it's part of the give and take. Last thing for me is in the 10 years almost that Donald Trump has been central to our political conversation, the one recurring thing that we know about him is that if you land a punch that he thinks is harmful to his interests, he'll punch back harder, whether he has a good argument to make or not. And so that's what he's doing. And I don't happen to think that it's I don't think it was the wrong decision by the Ford government to run these ads. I think you got to do something. You've got to make sure that people in the United States who might share your concern about the economic impact down there hear that point of view, and they're not getting enough of it from Republican politicians, that's for sure.
Well, I guess if punch back harder is the strategy, then the use of the word termination is probably part of that, because that's a stronger word than he's used before. I mean, he said, we're going to shut down the talks, or that's enough. We're going to cancel the next round of talks.
Well, and 2 days ago, he said if he was Canada, he probably would have run that ad too. I think your words to that effect.
Right.
So he got outraged about it on a bit of a slow burn, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, and plus, I think it helped along by what Chantal mentioned is the auto situation. And I want to get to that in a second, but I just want to, where does this leave Canada? If the talks are terminated for the moment, is there a choice that Canada has to make, that Ontario has to make? I mean, the good cop, bad cop routine that seems to have been going on a little bit between Carney and Ford, who talk a lot, has that reached a point at which somebody's got to make a decision about this ad?
I do think that this brings Canada's political class, not just leaders, to a fork in the road. And by the way, I thought this week that Carney was coming back to playing bad cop with Doug Ford, as opposed to being more good cop while Doug Ford was being bad cop. But Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford can, if they so want, say, as a gesture of goodwill, we are going to take down this ad. I don't know that that is something that Mark Carney would want to do, and I certainly don't know that it is something that Doug Ford, the Ontario Premier, would want to do. And I'm not sure how Canadians would react in Ontario and across the country to the spectacle of the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario just caving to a social media post from the President of the United States. That's one choice. The other choice is to allow the ad to stand and see if by some other way, and we've seen it in the past, that Donald Trump finds his way back to walking back some of it, that tweet. Hard to tell. The other person who has a choice to make is Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader. Mr. Poilievre, for the past 6 months, has basically had one strategy, and that is to say everything that goes badly on the trade front or doesn't happen on the trade front is always Mark Carney's fault. If that sounds familiar, it's because he used that strategy eventually effectively against Justin Trudeau. But this is different because if Mr. Poilievre's reaction is going to be, Mark Carney asked for this and he's responsible. And by the way, the Trump tweet blames Canada, but Canada did not run. This is not a federal ad, it's an Ontario ad. So if Pierre Poilievre wants to go there, he is basically taking a shot at the leading Conservative premier in this country. And that shot will not come freely to him. Why do I say that? Because in Ontario, Premier Ford is immensely more popular than the current leader of the Federal Party. And I think Bruce would know that better than I do. But I think the last poll I saw had the Ontario Conservatives running around 50% in voting intentions. The Liberals in Ontario are leaderless. But still, does Mr. Poilievre want to take a shot at a premier that is so popular in a province that determines the outcome of federal elections? That is a choice he has to make. And he also has to assess whether Canadians will agree with him that this is all Mark Carney's fault, which sounds a bit like a stretch no matter how you look at it.
Bruce, can you see Ontario pulling that ad?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I understand that the first placement of it was on one of the baseball games, and sometimes when you're buying like that, you're buying for multiple dates, and so I'd be surprised if they don't have those ads booked for tonight's baseball game and some of the subsequent ones. To spend 75 million Canadian running an ad means you're buying some expensive placements for sure, and over probably a limited period of time. So I think logistically it would be a tough call to make. Politically, I can imagine that there'd be an argument inside the Ontario political tent that maybe it's a thing to do, but I can hear the counter argument as well. And Doug Ford has not been uncomfortable being more pugilistic towards Donald Trump than the federal prime minister. And so, no, I don't think I'd be surprised if he did. And I'm with Chantal. I don't think it's Mark Carney's decision at all. I think that Pierre Poilievre may try to make it into something, but it would be ill-advised for him to weigh in on this, except on the side of tariffs are a bad idea. Ronald Reagan was right. That is the proper political position, I think, for Pierre Poilievre to take. I don't know that he's going to do that. I'm absolutely with Chantal that the chances that he would say, why don't I get in the ring with Doug Ford about this? That would be really stupid for him. He is not as popular as Doug Ford. He would be beaten up in that conversation pretty badly. And it would be coming on the heels of a really bad couple of weeks that Pierre Poilievre has had that has spooked, to say the least, a lot of members of his caucus who had been hoping that he would try to occupy more of a centrist, more of a pragmatic conservative position, and rather than kind of appealing to the fringe of his party, or more particularly in this case, to sounding yet again like he was a little bit more on Donald Trump's side. I think the great risk for him is to sound like he's kind of closer to Donald Trump just as a matter of chemistry.
Okay, I want to get to Poilievre after our first break, but I want to get at what seems to be the underbelly of this issue, and Chantal brought it up, and that is the auto sector in Canada and the importance of it to the economic growth of Ontario. Just like oil is to Alberta, the auto sector is to Ontario. And I think we sometimes, not we, the three of us, but we sort of collectively perhaps don't understand how vulnerable the future of the auto sector is in Ontario as a result of what's going on right now. Maybe you can play this out for us a bit, Chantal, because there's a lot at stake, lots of jobs, lots of economic growth for Ontario and for other parts of the country. But it's a huge issue, and you can see why Doug Ford is so caught up with it in terms of pushing it. So do you want to give us some on that?
With good reason. A good part of the economy of Southern Ontario is based on the auto industry. It's not just a mine in some area that is ailing. It's literally middle class Ontario. And you would remember that era. I covered Ontario campaigns way back, and with William Davis when he was premier and others. And what would we do when we were on the campaign trail? Follow the premier to make some announcement at an auto plant, and then go to some other town with an auto plant. It's a big deal, and it's electorally a really big deal too, because those communities are communities that elect or defeat Ontario governments, and the same goes in some parts for federal governments. Now, the problem that the auto industry faces, one, the intentions of the American administration are crystal clear on this. President Trump said as much in the Oval Office with Mark Carney sitting next to him when they met a couple of weeks ago. Howard Lutnick, his trade negotiator, came to say as much to a Canadian audience. They want the auto industry. Forget that the Auto Pact has been in place for decades, and then this is an integrated industry. They want it back. Now, the problem is, and that's a major difference with, for instance, aluminum, it's very hard to take the aluminum industry in Canada, and create it or recreate it in the US. You need to do some really heavy lifting. But it is not, as we saw this week, very hard to decide that you are going to retrofit an assembly plant in one country versus the other for one vehicle versus the other. These decisions are taken all the time, which basically means that it's a lot easier to carve out, empty out the auto industry from Ontario to the US. And in the end, it is not a totally heavy burden on the US auto industry by comparison, for instance, to aluminum or even softwood lumber, which the US needs for house building and whose tariff impact on house prices. That leaves parts, and we are producing them, but in the end, the US position is we're leaving crumbs on the table. I don't think Canada can accept that, and I don't think Canada has found that it can negotiate its way out of that because of the stated intentions of the Trump administration on this particular file. So the peril is real, and over 4 years, you can do a hell of a lot of damage to the auto industry. This is something that can happen within the time frame of the current administration.
Bruce?
Unless Americans start to coalesce against the Trump approach, including towards the auto sector, there's very little chance, to Chantal's point, that arguments from any other government are going to slow the U.S. president down. The Republicans are not pushing back on him. The industry in the United States is murmuring its discontent, is probably the best way that I could describe it. And so I think that the peril is real. I think that the hope, to the degree, and hope's not a strategy. I think strategy really is about diversification and trying to find other ways to make the Canadian economy more resilient against kind of these rogue influences in the U.S. And I say rogue influence because it happened before, but it happened in 1928 or something like that, to this degree. Normally, the American political pendulum would not swing this far in this direction. And so we're dealing with an unusual situation. The peril's real, but the hope probably is that over the coming months, and there's another inflation reading coming out today, I think it was, in the United States, that more and more public opinion starts to point in the direction of let's be careful not to go too far with this. Now, I think the CUSMA negotiations represent an opportunity for Canada to have a broader conversation and for the politics of these things to cool down a little bit, because there are real interests on the U.S. side in having this integrated trading relationship. But Chantal's right. The Americans have been very clear about this. The Americans in the Trump administration have been very clear about what they want to see happen with autos. And it's a big deal in terms of the impact, the potential impact on the Canadian economy. And I know that there's an instinct sometimes to kind of imagine that, well, there must be a simple solution for federal politicians to find to solve this, but that's wishful thinking. Trump is unpersuaded by most things on most topics most days.
And don't forget, this is an industry that is being addicted periodically to huge government bailouts.
Exactly.
So from Canada, but also from the U.S. So at some point, its interest is to please whoever is sitting in the White House. And, Canada is a smaller consideration when it comes to the future of the industry. And for the record, I hope I'm wrong, but I think Bruce is being optimistic on the CUSMA negotiations. He sees a place for progress where I wonder if we will be talking about the demise of free trade arrangements with Mexico, Canada, and the United States this time next year.
Okay. Your differences on that are noted, and
thank you.
We'll get to them.
Let's not bet on that.
Yeah, we'll get to them as those talks progress one way or another. You both kind of shot me down on this when I raised it a couple of weeks ago.
That doesn't sound like us.
Oh no, where is he going now?
So I do it in my own peril here by raising it again, because it just seems to me that if we're going to, like has happened this week, yet another plant moving south and breaking agreements that it made with the Canadian government for the help that it got in setting up plants and setting up certain production areas. If that kind of thing continues and there's more evidence of that, is that not going to just push Canada and the auto sector closer to China? We're going to have these plants that aren't being used.
Did we shoot you down on?
Well,
I don't remember that. I guess Bruce did, because.
Oh yeah, Bruce did. But I mean, it was this
of all the shootings, I don't remember that one.
No, seriously. Seriously,
I'm talking about EVs, Chinese EVs. Okay.
Yes, and there is an internal discussion ongoing about lifting the tariffs on Chinese EVs in exchange for the lifting of tariffs on canola. That is happening. There is also a discussion ongoing about moving, with government help, obviously, using some of those assembly lines, or pushing to use more of them to do the EV industry thing, and the expectation that come a decade from now, that is where you will want to be. So rather than try to hang on to whatever is leaving, try to reinvent the Canadian side of the auto industry. But this is easy to say. It's really hard. Remember when Japanese cars showed up on the Canadian market and the North American market, and how the auto industry screamed, they're killing us? What did we do? We tried to attract Japanese companies, Toyota, Honda, Korean companies, Hyundai, to create plants in this country. It's going to be a bit more complicated to woo Chinese interests to do the same here, not just because of the politics of it, but also because the Chinese can produce EVs at a lot cheaper cost at home than they would here. And that would involve expanding the trade war with the US, because whatever we do about EV tariffs on Chinese EVs or inviting the industry to take over some of those plants will put us directly in the sights of that White House.
Do you want to say anything? Do you want to join the cave in here and join the Peter?
Oh my God, he's so selective. He invents memories.
He's got the thinnest skin. It's so funny to watch. Look, I think that I do think it's too early to know about the EVs that China makes and the potential for that to become part of our industrial landscape. I think there are lots of reasons why. Chantal's points are well noted, why that's more tricky than it sounds. I do think, though, at the same time, one of the features of the Trump approach to geopolitics is that he at one and the same time wants to say, well, you can't do business with us the same way, but we also don't want you to do business with other people. And this is not just Canada that's facing this kind of pressure. Against that, I think that Canada is doing the right thing, saying we're going to have a different relationship with India from the one that we've had in the last number of years. We're going to have a different relationship with China. Now, stating those intentions isn't like concluding huge economic kind of two-way trade, but it's impossible for me not to look at the scenario with the United States and not come to the conclusion that Canada has to find better trade relationships with other big markets that have lots of potential to buy what we have, to invest in what we do here at home. And so is that going to cause some political consternation in parts of Canada? Sure it is. Is it going to make Donald Trump kind of want to terminate and thank you for attention to this matter? Probably it will at some point. But we can't have it both ways. That's what's apparent to me now. And we need politicians to pick a lane and decide, or pick two lanes, but decide to put as much emphasis on one as they're trying to solve for the other. That's a bad mixed metaphor, but I think you know what I mean.
We do.
We want to seriously diversify our trade. And I don't mean just the stuff of speeches, which we've heard for 50 years and then spent 40 getting closer to the US. If we're going to be serious about this, you need to be clear-eyed about the fact that we're not going to be doing this by doing business with our G7 friends. You cannot replace the huge part of the American market and what it means to us with trade deals with Belgium, although Belgium is an interesting partner. You need to find your way to do better in trade with India or China or both. And that will be politically complicated, but and in the end, we will still be largely dependent on the US. And that is the complication. You can't turn to India and China and say the US is not going to be happy and we don't care because we're going to do India and China. You can't say that, because geography and reality means that no matter what you do, we will still be doing a hell of a lot of business if we can with the United States. Geography, reality commands that. So squaring that circle is going to be quite a challenge.
Okay, we're going to take our first break, and we'll come back. We talk about Pierre Poilievre and the kind of week he's had right after this. And welcome back. You're listening to Good Talk for this Friday, right here on The Bridge. Sirius Channel 167, Canada Talks, are on your favorite podcast platform, or you're watching us on our YouTube channel. Bruce Anderson, Chantal, Hebert, Peter Mansbridge here. You know, one of the great things about doing this program is you get to hear from a lot of Canadians every week. I get between 100 and 200 emails a week, which is a lot. It's a lot more than I ever got when I was doing the National.
You're so popular. That's the
It's
thing.
popular.
You're very
It's a
popular.
popular program.
He's playing Carney to your Trump here, by the way.
But it also shows when I read this stuff that we have a wide array of listeners in terms of their political beliefs and their political likes and dislikes. And it's quite often if we take shots at the Prime Minister, whether it was Mark Carney or before him Justin Trudeau, we get liberal letters in saying, "Oh, you're being unfair, you're so unkind, and you're all in the tank for the Conservatives." And
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and we get the reverse from Conservatives, especially from those who are big fans of Pierre Poilievre. As soon as we mention anything that has gone wrong for Pierre Poilievre or take issue with something he said, those kind of letters come in. It's going to be interesting this week because the people who are at the core of the criticism of Pierre Poilievre in this past week have been, for the most part, conservatives. Conservatives who work for the party in a strategic way, whether it's working on campaigns or working in the communications office of senior conservatives, including former prime ministers. And they're raising issues about the strategy that Pierre Poilievre is using, and that it's, in their view, that it's damaging to the party, it's damaging to him, and it's not helping position themselves for any possible future election. Well, I guess a future election is not just possible, it's probable. It'll happen at some point. Anyway,
no, Mark, no, I'm not going there. I'll leave Trump to the canceling election thing.
Yeah. Well, he's certainly doing the construction work needed for that.
Yeah.
I can't believe those images of the East Wing. I mean, when I've sat in there interviewing, they often gave us the East Wing to do interviews at the White House, not just with former first ladies. But anyway, I digress. Pierre Poilievre, it seems to be agreed upon this has not been a good week with the fallout from remarks he made about Justin Trudeau and some of the positioning he's taken, as Chantal mentioned earlier, on the trade talks. What's your take? And Chantal, why don't you start us?
Okay.
So this week.
This has been a worst week of his leadership, except I guess for the week when he lost the election. There was one day this week when I was looking at National News Watch, which presents online a collection of stories from various sources, top of the line stories, and the 5 top stories were all about Pierre Poilievre, and they were all negative. And that's just on the English side. I'm not going to go on the French side. Even people who dislike Mark Carney, who are clearly not liberals, did not go out to write, this was, you don't understand, he's totally right on this, which we usually see. And you are right that the attacks came from inside the tent, which is always more damaging than when they come from the outside the tent. But also the defense offered on behalf of Mr. Poilievre was very, very weak and very, very muted. You did not see a lot of conservatives rush to the barricades to say he's totally right and Justin Trudeau should be in jail, to the point where, the Pierre Poilievre we have watched in politics for the past decade, but also as conservative leader, has had one strategy when it comes to his personal communications, and it is never explain, never apologize, and always double down. And that is not what happened this week. What happened this week is suddenly Mr. Poilievre was claiming that no one had understood what he was saying, that what he really meant was that he was targeting the previous chief of the RCMP, and he had never said that Justin Trudeau should be in jail, although it's a bit like the Ronald Reagan stuff we were talking about earlier. If you listen to it carefully, you cannot draw other conclusions than that is where he was going. So that was very different. And why was it different? Because a lot of people who supported Pierre Poilievre in the past had been hoping that he would, after the election, somehow become a more mature participant in the political conversation. And this kind of marked, for many of them in their minds, the last definitive sign that that's not happening. And as one put it to me, that he's just not able to do it. And that he is limited in that way. The fact that in the polls show that despite the Conservative support being very close to Liberal support and voting intentions, Mr. Poilievre himself lags double-digit points behind Mark Carney as best Prime Minister, also shows how perilous his position is, i.e. he is dragging the party down rather than lifting it up. And few parties have a lot of patience for opposition leaders who are actually a drag on parties' prospects rather than an opportunity. But I want to make one last point, because it struck me this week. Early on Monday, I was speaking to auto industry people from Quebec. There were about 500 of them. We spoke for about 45 minutes. And after it was over, I realized that over those 45 minutes, we maybe had mentioned Pierre Poilievre for about 50 seconds. And what that says is how outside the mainstream conversation that is taking place now, he is positioning the party. Normally, you would be able to say, I couldn't offer them, as you may guess, a lot of hope that things would be okay. But usually you would say, well, you know, the opposition has made this suggestion that the government should probably consider, or if there were another government, maybe we would take this tack as opposed. But nothing like that has been on offer. And it was very interesting because during the Q&A, I had a question about the NDP, but none about the Conservatives.
All right, Bruce, this is a little like a slow pitch right over the middle of the plate for you, but let's see what you can do with it anyway.
Well, I want to start by basically saying, you know, one of the great skills that Pierre Poilievre has is offense. He's a great, to use a hockey metaphor, and you'll tell me if I got this right. He is a one-way player, though. He is only good on offense, and he is not always great on offense, but he is pretty good at it. And he's developed most of whatever political support that he's built up by being a great offensive player, going at the other guys and using trenchant language and cutting right to the point. But when he has to play defense, he's miserable at it. And, you know, that old adage of it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. In this kind of situation, it's not the mistake, it's the attempt to clean up, which, you know, it took him 2 or 3 tries, all of them miserably bad. The most recent version featured him saying, well, I didn't say what you said I said. And it's such a technical line that he's trying to draw there that it caused everybody to kind of go, well, let's play the tape again. And let's look at what you said again. And so it should by now be a lesson that conservatives, and I'm sure that people around him know this lesson, which is that if you invite people to review the tape again of the thing that was, to Chantal's point, probably the worst thing that's happened to him at the worst possible time, you're compounding the problem that you created for yourself. He's 21 years, I think, in politics, and he's 25 points behind Mark Carney. In the contrast of Mark Carney delivering a pretty sobering message the other night about the state of the economic risks and what we're going to do about it. Contrast that, and people can have their point of view about it. I thought it was useful for him to do that. With that scene of Pierre Poilievre kind of sitting back, shirt unbuttoned, kind of man spreading a little bit with Chantal's laughing. This is where the letters are going to start.
I don't think I could do that description.
But when you put him in that
Continue,
situation,
you're on a roll. Go
and
ahead.
he's with hard partisans who are going to want to hear that kind of red meat talk, you're taking a risk. And is it a risk that you need to take? I guess that's the question behind all of this is, does he feel as vulnerable as taking that risk in terms of his leadership, as taking that risk might suggest? Because I would have thought that he's going to get a pretty good number out of that leadership review. But he's certainly, there's evidence now that there are members of his caucus who are kind of tired of seeing him continue to play like he wants that last election over again. He wants to talk about Justin Trudeau. And so when I see people like Lisa Raitt on panels saying, you know what, I don't understand why we're talking about Justin Trudeau. You see a lot of other conservatives who generally would be rushing to his defense saying, Justin Trudeau isn't here anymore. So not just talking about Justin Trudeau, but the last point for me is it's such an echo of Trump to lock up my last adversary. Setting aside the question of whether or not a putative prime minister should be opining about who should go to jail, who should be prosecuted, after having spent all the time that he did talking about what was wrong with the whole SNC-Lavalin thing, that didn't make any sense. But to decide that you're going to find a way to sound more like Trump, when pretty much everybody who'd be around you is saying, could you sound a little less like Trump? It's mystifying, but he's a one-way player at best.
You know, there are those within the Conservative Party who do want to still keep talking about Justin Trudeau. But it's a small group, right? It's not the group that's looking to the future and hopefully for them to gain power again. And the argument has been, at least the one that I've heard expressed on this program and others, that it's those people that are going to make that number good in Calgary in January. I don't get that. It doesn't make sense to me. If there's such a small group,
Well,
the only ones going to Calgary in the review vote?
they're not such a small group when Bruce talks about Trumpian undertones. People who self-identify as conservatives, when asked if they believe that Donald Trump is doing a good job, 40% of them or more say yes. There's a minute percentage in the larger pool of voters that believe that, but all of them are conservative. And identify as conservatives, whether for Maxime Bernier's party, if it still exists, or the conservative party that Pierre Poilievre leads. But the problem is, one, that with their views turn off other voters from voting conservative. But also, who else? This isn't a leadership contest. Who else are they going to vote for when the leadership review comes? They will never have as Trumpian a leader as the current leader, I believe. So the notion that you would energize them because you want to have a great score on your leadership review, at this point, it's kind of backfiring. There are a number of MPs and others in caucus, I should say senators, who are now thinking, if I bring people to Calgary, I'm not going to bring them to vote for Pierre Poilievre's continued leadership. There are more of those people this week than there were last week. They may not think they're going to win and see him gone, but that is how trouble starts, with people starting to think to themselves, I think we need to get rid of this leader. Many are waiting to see two things. One, does the budget pass, or do we go in an election? But the other is, what kind of a score does he get? And do I want to run again, or even stick around? And those two things are more in play now than they were 2 weeks ago.
And there's 3 months to go before that vote.
And possibly an election.
And possibly an election.
Which would terminate if he loses his career. My understanding is for all the posturing, the Conservatives are not very keen on having an election in 2025.
Well, to your point on that, Chantal, I mean, I think that if you're him and somehow you miscalculate and you say, we're going to vote against the budget, thinking that somebody else will vote to allow the budget to pass, if the country stumbles into an election that way, the chances are really good based on today's kind of public opinion model, I guess, that Poilievre's career in politics would be over within 40 days.
Exactly. But I'll go just a bit further if we're going to do political science fiction. There are many scenarios attending the budget vote, but suppose that the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, and the Conservatives declare on the day of the budget that they cannot support this budget, and that the thinking among Conservatives is we can keep enough members, 4 or 5 out, that the vote will not yield an election. You need to keep in mind that if Mark Carney decides that he wants an election, he doesn't need to wait for the vote. He only needs to go to the Governor General and say the opposition parties have clearly confirmed that they are going to defeat my government, so we're going to the polls. That's what Stephen Harper did in 2011. He didn't wait for the vote. So everyone's fixated on the vote in 1979 and Joe Clark. But a statement of intent from all opposition leaders is good enough to say, you want to do this, people, let's not have suspense for 3 days. Let's just go and ask Canadians how they feel about that. And chances are, you're right, Bruce, that Canadians might not look kindly on Mr. Poilievre in that scenario, but he would not have the chance to say, I'm against this budget, and then not, be careful enough to avoid the election that should result from that. So there are so many scenarios in play looking at this budget that it will make for a really interesting week.
All right. I got to squeeze in one more break. We'll do that right now and then be back after this.
What makes beer sold in Canada so different? The secret is the taxes. In Canada, 46% of the price of beer is government taxation, more than any other great beer nation. Help stop the annual beer tax increase before it goes into effect automatically. Go to hereforbeer.ca and ask yourself, why does the best beer nation have the worst beer taxation?
Okay, final segment of Good Talk for this week. Chantal, Bruce, Peter, all in the house for these last couple of minutes. The NDP, they still exist. They're not an official party, but they are looking for a leader, and they trotted out their candidates for the first time this week. I'm not sure how many people were watching because they're not exactly top of mind for a lot of Canadians right now, but nevertheless, they're giving it a go. Their vote for a leader is not until it's March, isn't it? It's quite a long ways away. You watched it, Chantal.
Yes.
Did you watch it, Bruce?
I don't know how you know that, but yes, no. I did.
I have that, secret. I have that little thing on your television that tells me what you're watching.
Okay. It's on my iPad. I was cooking. They great company.
There you go. What did you make of it? What stood out?
A couple of things. One, this was not a debate. It was more of a meet and greet, i.e. The 5 current candidates were each given 10 minutes with some Q&A. Most of the questions were similar, obviously, and it was sanctioned by the NDP, but hosted by the Canadian Labour Congress. So the real first NDP debate under the auspices of the party will take place in November. Second, there were 5 candidates on stage. That is not necessarily the final lineup. There are still some weeks to go, months, before the list is closed. So there could be more people coming into this campaign than we saw on stage. They were all interesting in ways, but only 2 of them, I think, stand out as people who have the experience to lead the party and try to lead the party out of its current predicament and have the political experience or the political skills to do that. And one is Heather McPherson, who is an MP, and the other is Avi Lewis, who has run twice for a seat in BC and has failed, but does have, well, it's probably in his blood. His grandfather was the leader of the federal NDP, and his father was the Ontario leader of the NDP. I thought that Avi Lewis stood out in the pack for a number of reasons. One, the NDP has a problem in this campaign. The plan was to have at least one question asked of every candidate in French, and they renounced that because I don't think they wanted to give that spectacle. Mr. Lewis spoke fourth. And he started off in French, and he did not just say bonsoir. And that way, he kind of showed up the Heather McPherson. She's been an MP in the House of Commons, did not say a word in French. The only sentence I ever heard of her in French was on a Radio-Canada program. I can understand she wouldn't want to deliver a full paragraph, given the state of her fluency in French. So he showed her up. The message was, I may not be, able to do a Tout le monde en parle interview tonight, but I do understand that this is important for an NDP leader, and I don't think that message was lost. I also found him very opportunistically political. I'll set aside the ideas. But the last question was, is there something we don't know about you that you'd like to share? And his answer was, and that's where the political blood shows, he says, yeah, he says, I'm a diehard fan of the Blue Jays. My dad took me to their very first game. It was snowing that day. A lot of people left. I don't know if Torontonians are that spooked by snow, maybe, but we stayed. And I thought, this kind of shows it's not a big idea. It's not you're not going to vote on that basis. What it does show, though, is political skills and a sense of timing. I thought that was interesting. So we'll see what happens next.
Well, these days, everybody's a Blue Jays fan, right?
Of course. But were you at the first game?
Everybody's not a Leaf fan, though. Don't get carried away.
I did have tickets to the first game in April of 1977. And I still have those tickets because I couldn't go to the game. I suddenly was sent off on a cover story in Europe. So I still have the tickets, unused tickets. So I'll accept offers if people want to send them
on eBay.
What a grift!
And I was also at the game where Joe Carter hit the home run to win the World Series in 1993. So there you go. I'm a Blue Jays fan too. But it's nice to see so many people across the country cheering for Toronto.
That's not what they're doing.
You sure don't see that any other time of the year. Listen, Bruce, I know you didn't see the NDP, and we don't have time if you did. So we've got to wrap it up for this week, but another good conversation as always.
I'll live with the pain. It's okay.
And we'll do it again next week. So thanks to Bruce Anderson, Chantal Hebert. Reminder that The Buzz is out tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. If you haven't already subscribed, you can do so at nationalnewswatch.com/newsletter. There is no charge. You just have to subscribe with your email. That's it for this week. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again on Monday.
Have a good weekend, you two.
Bye.